Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I am joined by, oh my goodness, I forgot the name already. Woodrow Johnston. There we go. He's the CEO of Revere Solutions, and he is best well known for his many campaign victories, over 180, being outspent 3-1, and doing innovative strategies for conservative political campaigns. And given the current state of the world in the news, I know we're going to have too much to talk about. So, welcome, Woodrow, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Cameron.
Excellent. Well, why don't we begin from the beginning? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into politics?
Yeah, I started. I think like a lot of people in my industry do. Typically they're interning or volunteering on a campaign. For me, it was actually a guy named Ron Paul back in 2011, and stuffing envelopes, making phone calls, that sort of thing, knocking doors, till eventually, you get paid to do that because you want to do it full time, and then after you know you start off, you knock more doors, you make more phone calls than everyone else. Now they want you to manage other people doing that. Then you start getting involved in the other aspects of a campaign, from the communications and press side um, to everything and everything in between, from polling to all that stuff. And now I've been doing it for over a decade, and I've been having a lot of fun doing it, and I enjoy fighting for what I believe in and getting paid to do so.
Well, what was it about Rand Paul that inspired you so much?
Ron Paul, to clarify, but I like him too.
That's what I meant to say. I apologize. Ron Paul,
Okay.
of course. Yes.
Yeah.
What about him inspired you so much?
Well, I think he was very unapologetic for his beliefs. He kind of spoke truth to power. He recognized a lot of the problems the country was facing at the time, and I think he was a charismatic figure that basically spoke some inconvenient truths, and gave a lot of what seemed like very easy, very simple solutions to a lot of those problems.
Yeah, yes, I remember when he kind of really first burst onto the national political scene. That people kind of cite that over and over again. You hear the same thing from the infamous Bernie Bros crowd on the left, sort of thing, obviously with President Trump now. What do you think about what was about that whole speaking to the power and saying uncomfortable things that do you think people gravitate towards?
Well, I think in particular, Ron Paul was, very critical of our foreign policy.
True.
And he felt that there was a lot of these kind of never-ending foreign wars that have these long-standing effects, even domestically. And I think what's interesting is seeing kind of Trump almost continue that, but rebrand it in a way that is palatable to people who thought Ron Paul was a whack job. Now, a lot of those people, I see Donald Trump saying a lot of the same things, but in a different way. And all of this, and now, and I'm happy for it. It's popular.
Well, it's a matter of packaging, isn't it? Someone can say a message, but if it's not packaged the right way that resonates with people, it falls flat. But slightly repackaged, or from someone people already like and trust, it can become the thing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Ron Paul's critics, described him as an isolationist and said that he wanted to withdraw, from the world. Donald Trump has the similar foreign policy, but he rebrands it and repackages it as America First and as America being stronger. And I think that's kind of genius. Like whereas Ron Paul was kind of tagged as this guy who wanted to make America weaker, which I don't believe was the case, but because the way it was packaged, I think Trump, successfully achieved that.
Yes. So I've noticed that looking on the signs that you say from behind, I see a lot of Idaho and Nevada. You must be from out west.
I am. Yeah. I live in Las Vegas.
Oh, good. I grew up in Denver. That's where I was. I was in Republican politics in Colorado for a long, long time, and then left in 2012 after Mitt Romney's campaign. So yeah, so I live in the East now, but I was kind of like, oh, Idaho and Nevada, very nice. So it's no, that works very well. I guess kind of diving into the deep end of the pool. Um, 2024. What do you think the Trump campaign got right that the Harris campaign did not?
Wow, that's a good question. Where do I even begin?
I said we're jumping into the deep end of the pool.
Yeah, right. I mean, one, I think, looking back, I think that they should have ran a primary, like a real primary. And, with the technology we have, they could have done it all in one day. I remember the Black Lives Matter organization was even saying that, which I was surprised because I figured they'd just be psyched to have, Harris as the nominee. But they're like, let's have a real primary. And I think that would have, and Harris probably would have won that primary, but I think it would have at least gotten the their base a little bit more excited. Felt like that felt like that their candidate was actually not just handpicked for them, which Americans just find Americans are very resentful of things like that, right? So I think that something as simple as that may have made the difference. I mean, look, I do believe President Trump has a mandate. He won every single swing states, but if you look at the margin in each swing state, it's not a huge margin. He won by, I think, 7 million votes. That's in a lot of situations that could be someone forgot to get out of bed the next morning, kind of thing, or their alarm clock.
Wisconsin was particularly close, 9,000 votes.
Yeah, right.
I mean, yeah, I mean that. Yes, it is. It is certainly that way. I always kind of, I was listening to another thing earlier from a man who's running to be chair of the DNC, and I said at the time, there is no precedent in American history where you've switched presidential candidates this late. You can't do that. Um, and I kind of said very famously, I think the DNC just lost us the election. And never have I wanted to be more wrong. Um, but that is the state of affairs. For people on the ground, we've had Trump in American politics now for 10 years. How has the Trumpization of the GOP changed politics for people like yourselves who knock on the doors and run the polls and call on the phone? How has Trump being head of the party changed that as opposed to the way it was before?
It's almost seems like an eternity ago before Trump. Now that he's kind of now he's going to a second term, but not in an 8-year period, within a 12-year period. And I think that, I guess maybe the tone, I suppose. I mean, people kind of have like some people I talk to have like this kind of rosy picture of what things were like, I guess, when George Bush was president.
Which is insane.
Yeah. And it is insane to me. And I'm just, and I think that's what they thought the strategy was with, parading around Liz Cheney, which I think was a mistake.
If you had told any of us in 2005 that Democrats would be campaigning with anyone with the last name Cheney, we would have laughed in your face because that's how unpopular George Bush was. I mean, and people forget, even in 2008, part of McCain's problem was George Bush was so unpopular by that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it drug the McCain camp. It was an albatross around their neck. It was an anchor the entire time to be running for the party with an unpopular incumbent. It's not an easy thing to do.
And people, I think, forget that, and this is, I think, a point people don't make enough is that the anti-war candidate typically wins, when it's not an incumbent president. In 2000, George W. Bush campaigned as a non-interventionist, as anti-war candidate at the time, which sounds crazy to say now. And he won. And then, of course, you read in his book, Decision Points, he said, well, I changed my mind. I got the security briefing, right? 2008, Barack Obama campaigns as the anti-war, candidate, gets us out of Iraq. And then same thing with Trump. Campaigns as the anti-war candidate. The American people do not like going to war. They like having a strong military, but they don't like using it. So I think that when you has how have things changed? I mean, look, Republicans for the past 8 years have been more trusted on things like the economy. Um, and it's funny because people go, well, the economy was so good under the first Clinton, under Bill Clinton, but and Democrats were trusted on the economy then, but they're not now. There's just some issues that Republicans rate higher on, and there's some issues that Democrats rate higher on. I'd say that's probably the biggest change.
Yeah. No, I think that is certainly true. What has it? Have you noticed any? What's the vibe? What was the vibe shift for you being involved in campaigns this last cycle?
It's funny. I where I get most of my vibe checks. I'm a pollster, so I hate like using so anecdotal, but it's funny. Going in an Uber drive and asking my Uber driver what they think is usually where I get my vibe checks.
Yeah.
It was so interesting that how oddly accurate it's been for me because I remember before COVID, it seemed like Trump was unstoppable, that he was going to win his reelection, right?
No,
And then
I've said, but for COVID, he would have sailed to an easy reelection. I mean, with 48% approval rating, that's doable. I mean,
Mhm.
I mean, Bill Clinton had that going into 96 and Bob Dole, who cares, sort of thing. I mean, it was fine. So no, absolutely. But for COVID, it would have been a completely different outcome.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, and then and then it was just kind of this whole, oh well, we just need to go back to normal, which is what like people were telling me, like and then as when they saw what normal looked like, it was hyperinflation, it was all these things, and you can debate on who caused that, but it was happening while Biden was president.
Right.
Um, that kind of was trying to tell me that I don't think Biden's going to win. And then you start hearing, kind of flub after flub after flub. I talked to my Uber drivers. They're like, yeah, I'm definitely not voting for him this time. And so they had to, and we were seeing polls that like Trump was going to win in places that we never thought a Republican would win again, that he was going to win in Virginia, he was going to win in New Mexico, that all these different, that Washington state, even that,
Yeah.
that Colorado was back in play. Right. So they had to make a change, and he kind of dragged it out. He dragged it out to like the last possible point where it was almost like they couldn't even swap his name out, but they did change him out, and then they did it in a way that we discussed earlier that was not, I think, the most conducive. And I think I pulled this pretty early on. Trump was riding a wave after he was shot. But when Kamala Harris got switched in, she had this really big, just like kind of um, just wave of like just like newness to her, and she was way ahead in the polls. And that just started to kind of wear off the more, and it was kind of interesting that she was getting criticized because she wasn't doing very many interviews. Um, and I think as a reaction, they started doing more interviews. But the more interviews she did, I think they started to realize that there wasn't a ton of substance there. When she had, and I would say her death moment, her death knell, was that Brett Baer interview, where she just really flubbed because they just couldn't fundamentally answer, what would you do different than Joe Biden? She couldn't answer that question. Um, and not in a way, not in a good way. And I think as a result, it's just like, well, we're not, it's just new Biden with a new, Biden with a new paint job. What's the difference? So ultimately, I think, that was where the kind of wave kind of changed right there.
No, I think that makes a lot. I think that makes a lot of sense. That's very interesting. One of the I think big stories of the election, and I'd be interested to kind of get your take since you do polling and all this type of thing. And I saw the indications of this in the 2020 exit polls, and 2024 followed the pattern that I anticipated. Um, is I noticed in 2020 Trump increased his vote share in every demographic except white men. And I said, "Oh, Democrats, you've got a problem. This will be very important in 2024. We've got work to do in almost every demographic across the country." Um, What do you think has been different about the Trump campaign this time that one galvanized white voters in a way that we haven't seen in decades, and two drew away such a diverse crowd? I mean, when I was in Republican politics in 2009, I said Hispanics were the future of the party, and it turns out I was right.
Mhm.
Um, and back then, everyone thought I was crazy, and I'm like, no, no, that's the future of the party. And I've kind of lived into the answer of being right on that. And that has kind of finally come true. But so we have this huge break on white voters to Trump. We have breaks among minority voters. What do you think about the 24 Trump campaign caused that big shift?
Well, I think that it's when you peel back the layers, a lot of these cultural values are in line with conservative values. I think that when you take at face value, oh, Republicans are racist, Trump's a racist, Trump's this, that, he's a dictator, he's a fascist, he's all these things. And a lot of people might just take that as face value and go, oh, okay, sure, he's a fascist. Well, then I guess I'm not going to vote for him. And then
Yeah.
you go, and and then, and then when you take like a typical, Hispanic family, who's usually Catholic, usually has conservative traditional values, um, they are, they're often completely in line with traditional conservative values. So it's like,
That's why I said they were the future of the party back in
yeah, and you were
2009 when
right.
I was in Young Republicans. I said, look, you have this reservoir of people who are going to be with you going to be with you in the areas where you're weak, which is social issues sort of thing, but they're going to be with you. And it's a growing block of voters. This is the future of the party sort of thing.
Mhm.
But it might require a little bit of concessions on immigration, perhaps. As it turns out, they didn't even have to give up that. They were
No.
able to hang on to immigration and get a rising share of the Hispanic vote on conservative social issues. So yeah, it worked. It definitely worked. It definitely worked out in that way. For white voters, though, what do you think was the big break? Because that was, I mean, that was a lot of Biden voters
Mhm.
that switched in a big way, especially young men, 18 to 29. That's usually a demographic Democrats win handily, and young women, they did very well. Young men, it was too close for comfort. Why do you think young men are drifting over to the GOP so much?
Well, I think that a lot of the times it ends up being the social issues. Like, I think that like most regular people were like, okay, whatever, gay marriage, people can marry whoever they want. It doesn't affect me
Right.
until it starts affecting them, right? And they start going, hey, you know what? Now you have to accept the pronouns that we have, and you have to now you have to be if your kid all of a sudden decides through that they're this gender, if you don't let us give them these hormones that are can cause irreversible damage, well, we're going to take your kids away, right? So I think when you start seeing this thing where it's like negatively impacting them, and you're like, hey, you're seeing like, and whether it's exaggerated or not, they see, a man decide they want to compete in women's sports, a lot of people see that and they go, okay, this has maybe gone a little bit too far.
Yes. I mean, that definitely
And
seems to be
even
the.
Democratic strategists, my counterparts, have said the same thing.
No, I mean, I think, yeah, I think that is definitely, unfortunately, for better or for worse, was a bigger mover than for people than we initially realized. I think same thing with Gaza and Israel Palestine. That was a bigger mover than I think anyone really realized.
Which is
So
still wild to me because like both candidates
I
are Zionists, but
Yeah, no, I know, I totally agree. I'm amazed that was the mover it was, considering you think you're going to get a better deal out of Trump. No, like I'm like Trump's already said they're going to get everything they want, sort of thing. So like that's like what are you really doing here politically? But certainly that was all of these sort of issues and side issues and all this sort of thing. One of the other big stories from the past election was media coverage, and I'm curious about this, especially for down ballot races. The information media environment has changed, and this past election was the election of influencers. And I even said that. way back in August, talking about the Harris campaign. We saw podcasts, this format that we're doing right now, become a bigger mover than TV, radio, all this type of thing. How do you think that has changed American politics, especially for down ballot races?
Well, it means that, of course, for my industry now everyone wants to go on podcasts, right?
Well, we're so glad to have you booked in, Mr. Johnston.
Thank you. But my clients too, right? And now it's like I have to, it's kind of.
Well, you must give me a call in 2026 then.
Right. No, I mean it's one of the disciplines within politics is media booking, right? Getting interviews with different podcasts. Or before it was like TV and radio and all. Now we're seeing more on the podcasts, and. I mean, and I almost forgot to mention, everyone was saying, oh man, we need all the Democrats were saying, oh, we need a Joe Rogan on the left. And I was like, you already had Joe Rogan on the left. He's a left leaning guy. And you guys screwed up by not going on his show. I don't know why you didn't. Right.
Yeah.
And it comes out the reason why she didn't go on his show was because she didn't want him to. She had all these preconditions. You can't ask me about marijuana, which is wild because, if Democrats ran on marijuana more, they'd win more races. I don't know why they don't.
Yeah,
because it's like all Democrats and half of Republicans want marijuana to be legal. So it's a winning issue for them. But and we can't run on it because half our base doesn't want it. So we have to just kind of ignore it.
No, I think the marijuana thing, I wouldn't necessarily agree all Democrats want. I think there's an older wing of the party that is not necessarily as enthusiastic about legalization as we would like. And I say this because in 2012, I was part of the petition in Colorado that got weed legal. I was the dude in front of the grocery store. Hi, we'd like to legalize marijuana. Please sign our petition. I was that guy for a couple months. And because I thought it was very important, and why haven't we done this already? And honestly, the people in Colorado that got that through consistently were under 40. Like that was who got that over the line, and it wasn't much. Only won by 55%, which is enough. I think there's a hesitancy at the top of the party, which is all ran by old people, to not really go all in on that issue. So I was not surprised when that came out about that, because I think there's a hesitancy to really go in on that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I do think that there's definitely some older Democrats, but I also think that those older Democrats who vote Democrat aren't going to go, well, I was going to vote for Harris, but she supports legalization. Like that they don't. They're going to vote for the Democrat no matter what. So she might as well have gone all in on that to get those younger people, which she lost.
No, I mean, I will say this when it comes to voting activation for younger people. I've watched legalization ballot initiatives get people to vote for the first time and get them engaged in politics. And I would say that of personal friends of mine that I've watched it happen to, and I've also kind of seen a few broader trends as well. And I think that I agree with you that that's definitely, I think, an unforced error, and maybe something to learn on down the road, especially now so many states have legalized. This isn't even hardly a question anyway. I mean, there's so many states where it's gone through. It's much more of a mainstream issue than it was 12 years ago when we were trying to be the first state to really do it. So, yes, I think that is interesting. The other thing I want to ask you before I get you out of here, the now infamous Ann Seltzer poll in Iowa that she's currently being sued by the Trump campaign about. Mm-hmm. I saw that poll and said, I'd like to know what Ann Seltzer's drinking and what she's smoking, and can I have two of both, please? Here's my address. Because I'm kind of like, Iowa will vote Kamala Harris, any Democrat +6 when hell freezes over. That's funny. Especially considering, I mean, just on environmental regulations alone, that's how you lose Iowa. It's a state full of farmers, for God's sake. We're trying to get rid of ethanol. That's half their business. Not this is not. How is this working? What went right? What went wrong with that poll? What? And Seltzer's gone off the rails. What do you think happened with that?
I'll tell you exactly what happened.
Oh, good.
I
Enlighten us.
actually know this. I actually know this. Like, I'm so intimately familiar with it that if Ann Seltzer got sued, I could be the expert witness for Trump to sue them, because I I literally took that same methodology that she used, the same
Yeah.
way she sampled her people, and applied it to one of my polls where Trump was winning, and I just
Mhm.
and it flipped it from Trump winning by 4 or 5 points to Trump losing by 6. And the reason why is because she didn't use like the demographics of people who show up and vote as her, as their balancing to actually determine, the sample. She
Mhm.
used census data. She used basically just the total population of everyone there.
Right.
And the reality is not everyone votes.
Most people don't vote in this country.
Most people don't vote. Most people don't vote. And if they do vote, they only vote in presidential elections. But
Right.
that's another thing. But still, it was not reflective of the electorate, and therefore, and I believe, I don't know this, but I believe purposefully so. Uh, I'm sure she, I think she probably got a payoff uh, to help out, the Harris campaign. And so I, honestly, the Trump campaign, I think has Trump has an actual case there for, for his lawsuit, I believe. But
Yeah.
there's just no way. And she was kind of on her way out. She's pretty much retired from polling now, so she's like, hey, let me get this last payday in. Harris had so much money, that more money than a campaign's ever had, and I'm still like flabbergasted that she somehow
Yeah.
somehow somehow was still in debt by the end of it. uh Gotta say, I'm pretty glad that person's not running the running our budget.
No, no, certainly so. Um, it seems like 2024 was the first time the pollsters finally figured out how to poll for Trump. Because
Mhm.
it's been a problem since 2016. Like 2016 was like the polling was so far off. And 2018, the red wave did not wave. 2020 was kind of okay, but still was not that accurate. It seems like the pollsters have finally figured out how to poll for Trump, sort of thing, just in
Mhm.
time for it to not matter anymore. Um, how do you think how has polling changed to get it right for Trump?
Well, I think the biggest change, and which is why I don't even, I barely ever use live calls anymore. I think that when a live call being someone calls you on the phone and then asks you the questions,
Right.
and then records your answer. I think that is just kind of outdated. I think no
Well,
matter.
yeah, good luck finding anyone under 50 to answer the phone.
Well, yes, one, good luck but even if you do get someone on the phone, I think people are, whether they say so or not, are generally people pleasers and will not give your most honest answer um,
True.
on the phone to a person. So my polling methodology that I typically use is more focused on a text message where, it feels a lot more anonymous. You get a text message, you answer the questions, with your phone. Um, it takes the human element out of it. And I think that's probably been the biggest change, is that it's been more on text messages, which I just think are much more accurate than a live phone call.
No, that makes sense. Absolutely. Well, let me do this. This has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for coming by. This has
Sure.
been wonderful. And absolutely fascinating. Why don't you let us know where we can keep up with you online, follow you on socials, etc.
Absolutely. So would on most socials, I'm either Real Woodrow Johnston or Liberty Woody. That's a callback to Ron Paul, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, and my two websites, to either tacticalcampaigns.com or reveresolutions.com.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you, Cameron.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.